All right. So we are going to begin today our discussion of Book One of Plato's Republic. And we'll spend today and Thursday talking about Book One. And Book One is one of the most, Chapter One, Book One, is one of the most famous chapters ever written in the history of political philosophy. In fact, some people suggest that Book One could possibly have been intended as a standalone dialogue. In its construction and its completion, Book One could actually serve as a standalone dialogue. But as it is attached to Plato's Republic, again, one of the most important and infamous books ever written in world history. And Book One is the famous book about the debate of justice. In Book One, we see Socrates engage in an extraordinarily important series of debates, first with Cephalus, then with Cephalus' son Polemachus, and then with the sophist Thrasymachus about justice, about what is justice. And it's in and through Book One that Socrates responds to several claims, Athenian, Homeric claims to what justice is. We see Socrates respond. We see a kind of a partial victory in Socrates' response to Thrasymachus, and that's what allows the rest of the book to continue. In Book One, we see Socrates respond to three standard accounts of justice that derive from the Homeric traditions. And we see Socrates respond to each one and overcome each one. And it's only because he's able to respond and overcome each conception of justice that the rest of the book is able to continue, right? Because then they go on and search for justice in the soul of the individual and in the city. So Book One is one of the most famous chapters ever written and one of the most famous and infamous books ever written. And so we'll spend today and Thursday talking about it. And now, before we get to the discussion of justice, right, as we've said now, in all of the Platonic dialogues, we've seen this certainly in the Euthyphro. We saw this in the Apology, and we've seen it in the Crito, and again, we're going to see it in the Republic. In all of the dialogues that we read in this class, the most important thing happens before the important things happen. And once again, this takes place in the Republic. As I just said, Book One of the Republic is about justice. It's about the famous debates about justice that Socrates has with Cephalus, Polemachus, and Thrasymachus. But before we get to the discussion of justice, something extraordinarily important happens on the first page and a half of the actual dialogue. The single most important thing, perhaps, in the entire dialogue takes place. And so we have to talk about that. We have to talk about what takes place before we get to the actual debate about justice between Socrates, Cephalus, Socrates, Polemachus, and Socrates and Thrasymachus. So what happens? What happens in the opening pages of Plato's Republic? What is the important thing that happens that we have to bear witness to, that we have to attend to, and that we have to understand? Because once again, this makes possible the rest of the book. So what is that? What happens? And why is it important, and what do we need to pay attention to? Now, we said last week that we can think of the Republic as a whole as the second apology of Socrates, right? And literally the second apology, because the first apology didn't work, right? We've already read the first apology, and that was the account of Socrates' trial. And we will recall that apology means defense, right? And so when we think about the first defense of Socrates' trial, the trial about Socrates himself, the trial about philosophy, the trial about philosophy's relationship to the city. If we think about the first defense, and despite the fact that Socrates did a very good job actually defending himself, it's heartbreaking to realize that the charges are untrue, but they kill him nonetheless. And so because they kill him nonetheless, if we think about the first apology ultimately as a kind of failure, right? Socrates is unable to defend himself personally. Philosophy is unable to defend itself as a way of life that is useful to individuals and useful to families and useful to cities. And if it's a failure at the end of the day, because poetry wins. If we've started this class in this great conflict between poetry and philosophy, between city and philosophy, then the first apology ends in the death of Socrates. It ends in the death of philosophy. And in many ways, it ended in the death of the city itself in a tragic way, because Athens lost the war to Sparta. They were occupied by Spartan allies, the Macedonians, for many years. And in many ways, the city died. So the first apology of Socrates, as profound and revelatory as it is, and as a gift as it is to humanity, because we get to see the arrogance and the ignorance of Miletus, and ultimately the waywardness of the city. But if the first philosophy can be seen in many ways as a failure, Socrates is executed. Philosophy is silenced. And even in the great conflict, poetry wins, but in winning, it loses the city. So if we can think of the first defense as a kind of failure, the victory of poetry over philosophy, the death of Socrates, we can think of the entire Republic as the second apology, of Socrates. The Republic is Plato's final defense of Socrates, his great teacher, his great mentor, and it's Plato's final defense of philosophy. And most importantly, it's Plato's final defense of the relationship between philosophy and the city. So when we talk about the second apology of Socrates, we mean it in kind of three ways. We see Socrates, Plato defending Socrates, his teacher, rehabilitating him from the grave. We see Plato defending philosophy, and we see, most importantly, Plato finally giving a sort of account of the ultimate relationship between philosophy and the city. So the Republic is the second apology. And I spoke about the second apology to set up the first page, because what we have in the first page, and this is what the important thing is that takes place before the important things take place, the debate about justice, is we see Plato reenact the trial of Socrates. On page 1, we see a kind of a poetic reenactment. We see Plato's narrative reenactment of the trial of Socrates. Right? That's what we get on page 1. So let's read along. So it starts out in Socrates, and by the way, my edition has page 3. Does your edition have page 3? Can someone nod for me? Okay, I love you guys. Thanks. So we ready? So we start book 1, first line, page 3, Socrates. I went down to the Piraeus yesterday with Glaucon, son of Ariston, to pray to the goddess. And at the same time, I wanted to observe how they would put on the festival, since they were now holding it for the first time. Now, in my opinion, Socrates says, the procession of the native Athenians, the native inhabitants, was fine. But the one the Thracians conducted was no less fitting a show. After we had prayed and looked on, we went off towards the town. Okay. Now, first, as you should know, Socrates is with Glaucon, and Glaucon is Plato's brother, and Adeimantus is Plato's brother. So Socrates is at a festival, and by the way, it's a religious festival. And Socrates and Glaucon have gone to see the processions, and Socrates and Glaucon are now on their way back to the town. I went down to the Piraeus yesterday with Glaucon, son of Ariston, to pray to the goddess. And at the same time, I wanted to observe how they would put on the festival, since they were now holding it for the first time. After we had prayed and looked on, we went off towards town. So Socrates and Glaucon have been to the festival. It's a religious festival. They have seen the processions. They've given the sacrifices, and now they're returning to Athens. And he goes on, this is Socrates still. Catching sight of us from afar as we were pressing homewards, Polemarchus, son of Cephalus, ordered his slave boy to run after us and order us to wait for him. The boy took a hold of my cloak and from behind said, quote, Polemarchus orders you to wait. And Socrates, turned around and asked him where his master was. He is coming up behind you, he said, just wait. Of course we'll wait, said Glaucon. A moment later, Polemarchus came along with Adeimantus, Glaucon's brother, Nicerotus, son of Nicias, and some others, apparently from the procession as well. Polemarchus said, quote, Socrates, I guess you and Glaucon, I guess you two are hurrying away to get to town. And Socrates says, that's not a bad guess, I said. Well, Polemarchus said, do you see how many of us there are here? Socrates says, of course, I do. Polemarchus says, well then, he said, either prove stronger than these men or stay here. Socrates says, isn't there still one other possibility? I said, our persuading you that you must let us go? Can we talk you out of keeping us? Can we persuade you into letting us go on our way? And Polemarchus says, could you really persuade people if we do not listen? Polemarchus says, could you really persuade if we do not listen? There's no way, said Glaucon. Well then, think it over, Polemarchus said. Well then, think it over, bearing in mind we won't listen. Okay, before we go on, Plato has, in a poetic and a dramatic way, reenacted the trial of Socrates. Socrates has been charged by Miletus. He has been held by the many. He's been made to defend himself. He's been made to speak about who he is at the trial before the many strong, the many powerful, the demos. And Socrates tried to, as he did in the first trial, Socrates tried to persuade the jury to let him go. But the jury didn't listen. And now Plato has reenacted the trial. Socrates and Glaucon are on their way home. Polemarchus arrests them, orders his employee to go and hold them, restrain them. My master orders you to wait. Polemarchus comes and he says to Socrates and Glaucon, I see that the two of you are in a hurry to go. And Socrates says, yes, you're right. And Polemarchus says, well, do you see how many there are among us? And it's a metaphor for the jury and the thousands of people assembled at the original apology. And Socrates says, of course, I see. And it's playful, it's poetic, it's narrative, it's playful, but it's very potent. It's very, very symbolic. And Polemarchus says, well, look, prove stronger. You either fight your way free, prove physically stronger, prove stronger, or stay with us. And Socrates says, well, isn't there another option? Can I persuade you to let us go? And Polemarchus says, how can you persuade people who won't listen? How can you persuade people who will not listen? So either prove stronger or stay with us. And so already we've only got to the bottom of the first page and we're at an impasse. Socrates and Glaucon. Socrates wants to go. He's done with the festival. He wants to go spend his time thinking philosophically, pondering the great questions of life. He's been arrested symbolically by Polemarchus and his comrades who don't want Socrates to go, who in fact want Socrates to come back to Polemarchus' house and probably entertain them. And Socrates says, can I persuade you to let me go? And the young and the many and the powerful say, no, we won't listen. You can't persuade people who won't listen. And so not only do we have the enactment of the trial, but we also have an impasse. Socrates wants to go, but he's old, and there are always many fewer philosophers than there are the many, so there's no way Socrates is going to fight his way home. Polemarchus and the many and those who possess metaphorically power in this moment want him to come back. And so we're at an impasse. We're at an impasse. Now, for the conversation to continue, for the book to continue, for the relationship between philosophy and the city, whatever it will be, to continue, some compromise has to be made between wisdom and power. Right? Socrates, the wisdom of the philosopher is done. He wants to go home. The power of the young and the aristocratic and the many, in the name of Polemarchus and Niceratus and Thrasymachus and Adeimantus and soon Glaucon have come, and he said, no, we want you to come. And we're not going to listen, and we're going to force you to do as we say. And so there's this impasse. There's this impasse between wisdom and power. And as we saw in the first apology, power killed wisdom. Right? The city executed Socrates. It silenced philosophy. But if there's ever going to be a relationship between philosophy and the city, if we're going to get past page 2, right, of a 300-page dialogue, right? If we're going to get past page 2, there's got to be a compromise. There's got to be some compromise between wisdom in the name of Socrates, in the name of philosophy, and power, the power of the young aristocrats and the many. If there's ever going to be some relationship between philosophy and the city, some compromise has to be made. The original apology that we read last week, there was no compromise between philosophy and the city. The city killed Socrates. The city silenced philosophy. There was no compromise between wisdom and power. Power won. Much to its own regret, its own demise. But power won. So Plato is reenacting the trial here. And unlike the first apology, where there was no compromise between Socrates and the city, between philosophy and the city, between poetry and philosophy, where there was no compromise, here Plato enacts a compromise. There has to be a compromise between wisdom and power. If there's no compromise between wisdom and power, if compromise between wisdom and power is not possible, if the compromise can't be found, it can't be negotiated, and it can't be made, then there is no going forward. Right? And this is the beginning of something very profound. Right? Because even though in the first apology there was no compromise, and Socrates was killed and philosophy died, the power didn't fare well either. Power itself, in its own ignorance and its own arrogance, Miletus in his own arrogance and his ignorance, and the city in its arrogance and its ignorance collapsed. It itself also disappeared. Right? So some compromise has to take place between power and wisdom, right? And not only does some compromise have to take place, but this also illuminates something extraordinarily deep and extraordinarily important. What it reveals is this idea that not only must there be a compromise between wisdom and power, between philosophy and the many, right? Philosophy and the many, wisdom and power. Not only must there be a compromise, but the compromise reveals one of the most important lessons of all politics. And that is, in political life, in human life and in political life, no one gets everything they want. No one gets everything they want. Now, what the hell am I talking about, right? What is this no one gets everything they want? On the one hand, Socrates, he's a philosopher. He represents pure wisdom. He represents the philosophical way of life. What does he want? What do the philosophers really want? What do they ideally want? They want to think. They want to be left alone to think. They don't want to be murdered by the city. Right? They don't want to be charged with corrupting the youth. They don't want to be charged with inventing new gods. They don't want to be murdered by the fucking city. What do they want ultimately in this ideal sense? They want to be left alone to think. Okay? And Socrates is on his way home to go and think. But he can't. He's held back. A compromise has to be made. Socrates just can't go. And on the other hand, what do the young men want? What do the young Athenian aristocrats want? Well, they first of all, they're immature at this point. They mostly want Socrates to come to Polemarchus's house with them, have some snacks, have a couple of glasses of wine, and have literally Socrates entertain them. They've got Thrasymachus with them, and they've got some other very famous sophists. And boy, if we can get Socrates before Socrates escapes, if we can get Socrates and we can bring him back to my place, it's going to be a great debate between Socrates and Thrasymachus. That's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be very entertaining. So let's go get Socrates and bring him back to entertain us. So the many want entertainment. The many want to be entertained by Socrates. They want to see the spectacle of the conversation. They don't want the revelations of philosophical wisdom. They just want the spectacle of the debate. But here they are. They're at an impasse. Polemarchus says, look, either prove stronger or come with us. Socrates says, can't I persuade you to let us go? Polemarchus says, you can't persuade people who don't listen. And there we are. We're at the impasse. And so some compromise has to be made. We're going to see that in just a second. But not only must the compromise be made, but the compromise reveals that nobody, no part of the city, the part that represents wisdom, the part that represents power, no part of the city gets exactly what they want. Right? And by the way, we're going to see exactly how they don't get exactly what they want. That's coming. But what the compromise reveals, right, is that neither wisdom nor power gets entirely what it wants. If wisdom is going to have a relationship to the city, if wisdom is going to participate in the city, for two reasons: one, to help the city, and two, to help keep the philosophers from being killed by the city, they have to give something. What do the philosophers have to give? They have to give their knowledge. They have to give their knowledge in the form of ruling, as we will see, right? Ultimately, the book will argue for philosopher kings, right? What do the philosophers want? They want just to think. Nobody gets to do just what they want. So what part of the compromise do they have to make? Well, they don't get to think all the time. Some of the time, they're going to have to give wisdom to the city. They're going to have to become philosopher kings, which in a way is the last thing they want to do. They don't want to rule. The last thing they want to do is be bothered with solving other people's problems, ideally speaking. So philosophy must give its wisdom to the city. Now, ultimately, what does power, what must power give? Even when it doesn't quite understand it in its entirety. The young men who have just arrested Socrates don't understand what's in store for them. But ultimately, what they will yield to, what power must also give, is the recognition that wisdom must rule. Power can have its entertainment, but it can't rule. And so here we are. We're at an impasse. Socrates wants to go. Polemarchus says, prove stronger or come with us. A compromise has to be made so the relationship between wisdom and power, between philosophy and the city can continue. If this impasse is not broken, if this compromise isn't brokered and negotiated, if some relationship between philosophy and the city, between wisdom and power can't be made, then nobody survives. Nobody survives. Right? Which is, by the way, which was precisely the outcome of the first apology. Right? That was precisely the outcome. Nobody survived. Socrates died, the city died. Nobody survived. And by the way, in this beautiful, poetic, and metaphoric way, this impasse is also the same impasse we saw between Socrates and Crito. Right? Between Socrates and Crito. Crito came to break him out. Socrates tried to explain to him why he won't go. Crito couldn't understand. There was that silence. There was that impasse. Until finally Socrates gave him the ironical story of the laws, right? So Socrates could die and Crito could go home and not get in any more trouble. So here we are, we're at this impasse. And how is the impasse negotiated? What's the way out of the impasse? Back on top of page 4. Socrates says, isn't there still one other possibility? Socrates said, our persuading you that you must let us go. Polemarchus, could you really persuade us if we don't listen? Glaucon, there's no way. Polemarchus, well then, think it over, bearing in mind we won't listen. And here's the compromise. Then Adeimantus said, Adeimantus, Plato's other brother, he goes, he says, is it possible, he says, is it possible you don't know that at sunset there will be a torch race on horseback for the goddess? He says, hey, Socrates and Glaucon, you're on your way home, but don't you know that at sunset there's going to be this extraordinary torch race on horseback? Right? Then Adeimantus said, is it possible you don't know that at sunset there will be a torch race on horseback for the goddess? And Socrates says, on horseback? Oh, that's novel. That's new. Will they hold torches and pass them to one another while racing the horses? Or what are they going to do? Right? And Polemarchus says, that's it. Right? That's it, said Polemarchus. And besides, and not only that, but after the horse race with the torches, and besides, they're going to put on an all-night festival that will be worth seeing. You guys don't want to miss that, do you? So, Polemarchus says, speaking to Glaucon and Socrates, come with us, come with me. We'll get up, we'll go back to my father's place, my house, Cephalus's house. Come with us, Socrates and Glaucon. We'll go have dinner at my house, right? We'll have some drinks, right? We'll get up after dinner and go see it. This is Polemarchus. And he says to Socrates, and there will be together with many of the young men, Socrates, and we'll talk, and you can talk and entertain us. So stay and do as I tell you. And Glaucon says, well, it seems we must stay, we must go. Well, if it is so resolved, Socrates says, right? So again, poetic, metaphorical, but really profound. The compromise, at the end of the day, the compromise between wisdom and power, between philosophy and the city, is compromised through the promise of entertainment, right? Adeimantus says, to break the impasse, hey, I know you guys want to go, but maybe you don't know. Did you know that at sunset, there's going to be this extraordinary procession? There's going to be these horse races with torches. And after that, there's going to be an all-night feast. There's going to be a party, there's going to be a rave. Adeimantus says there's going to be a rave, literally what we would call a rave. There's going to be an orgy. There's going to be an all-night festival. There's going to be a rave. That's what it is. That's what's coming. He says, you guys don't want to miss that. So he says, look, Socrates, come with Glaucon, Socrates, come with us to Polemarchus's house. We'll have some dinner. We'll have a few drinks. Socrates, there's lots of young men there that you can talk to. You can seduce into your philosophy. We'll have a lot of fun watching. And then later, we'll go and we'll watch it. And we'll go to the rave. We'll go to the party. And Glaucon says, that's a great idea. We've got to do it. And Socrates says, so if it is resolved. So the compromise has been brokered. But it's been brokered through the promise of entertainment. Cannot exaggerate how deep and profound this is. The compromise between wisdom and power, between philosophy and the city, is conveyed through the promise of a kind of entertainment. Is conveyed through the promise of a kind of entertainment. Right? And even now, right? The relationship between wisdom and power functioning perhaps as through the medium of entertainment in late modern democratic society, in the deep irony of everything. As we said, and we've been talking slowly, right? We're going to read one of the most profound books ever written, and one of the most dangerous books ever written, because it's a cautionary tale about the most just city that really isn't the most just city. And it's a city built on the annihilation of everybody over 10. It's a city built on lies, and it's a city built on force. And it's run, it's held together by noble lies, by irony. And at the end of the day, it's a city in which the many get to do what they want. They get to have their raves, they get to have their parties, they get to have their wealth, as long as they don't rule. As long as they don't rule. And that's ultimately the republic. We will see this. This is when I say we're going up the river to the heart of darkness. We're on the journey. And so some compromise between wisdom and power has to take place. There has to be a compromise between the philosophy and the city. Otherwise, everybody dies. The city will go on killing the philosophers. And after they kill all the philosophers, they themselves will burn their own houses down, like Athens did, like we are doing now. We are beginning a reading of one of the most profound books ever written in political philosophy and politics. And it's a book written about whether or not people are wise enough not to burn their own house down. And we're beginning this reading on the day in which this country, at the end of its great experiment, will decide whether it wants to burn itself down or it wants to somehow continue to survive in some wisdom, in some and some philosophical wisdom. So the compromise is made. Now, again, another moment of kind of heaviness. So Polemarchus and Adeimantus and now Glaucon and Niceratus, Thrasymachus is already at the house. They think that they have kind of scored a great victory here because they've talked Socrates and Glaucon into coming back, and they're going to have some wine, and Socrates is going to entertain them, and then they're all going back to the rave. They're all going back to the party. But we know perfectly damn well that they never go back. They never go back. The young men, the young aristocrats, the powerful, the wealthy, they think they've achieved a kind of victory. They think they're going to be entertained, and they think they're going to return to their life of wealth and power and pleasure. And yet they never return. As we know, they go to Polemarchus' house and they never return. They don't return to the city. They don't return to their pleasures. They don't return to the rave. In fact, they go and they build a new city. Right? They never return, which is extraordinary. Right? Once they leave, they never go back. And this is incredibly symbolic. It's not just that they don't go back to the rave. That's true. They don't go back to the party. That's true. And that's profound enough. But they never go back to Athens. Once they go to Polemarchus with Socrates, and once they think they're going to be entertained, and once they think they're in control, they never go back. And it's this fascinating moment because it's kind of like Euthyphro. Remember when Euthyphro, the whole time Euthyphro was being educated, he thought he was in fact Socrates' teacher. He thought he was Socrates' teacher. He thought he was imparting knowledge to Socrates. And the whole while, it's just the opposite. And these young men, these young Athenian aristocrats who believe they've kind of captured and talked Socrates into coming back and entertaining them and then returning to the party with them so they can continue with their life of pleasure and influence and power and dominance. Once they head back to Cephalus' house, they never return. And it's not just that they don't return to their life of pleasure. They don't return to Athens, right? Whatever city they go on to build in the Republic, whatever imaginary, philosophical, theoretical city and speech that they build in the Republic, it's not Athens. They build a new city. They don't go back and fix Athens. They build a new city. Right? And this is extraordinary because now Socrates' prophecy at the beginning of the Apology, Socrates' prophecy or his statement to the jury at the beginning of the Apology, I ask that you treat me as a what? Foreigner. Before Socrates ever begins his defense in the first apology, the first thing he says to the jury, I ask that you treat me as a foreigner. And the deep message there was precisely because I'm a citizen of this city. This city is going to kill me. I'm going to follow its sentence. I'm going to follow its law, and I'm going to follow its sentence even to my death. That's true. I'm born of this city, I will die of this city, but I'm no longer attached to it, attached to its values, attached to its purposes, attached to its core ideas about the most essential things. I am a foreigner. And I want you to treat me that way. I want you to try to conceive of me that way. And when we were talking about that, what feels like 100 years ago now, right? That was profound, because what does it mean to be foreign and still in the city? And ultimately, what does it mean to leave one's city, to leave one's family and build a new city? And now that's what these young men are doing. Once they leave once they go back to Polemarchus's house with Socrates, they never go back. They're never, ever again citizens of Athens. They go and build a new city. So in a way, in this really profound way, the criticism about the danger of philosophy in some ways, right? It's profound, right? Philosophy is a threat to the city, because if the city's core values are flawed, if they're objectively untrue and they're dangerous and they cause crisis, perhaps the crisis is so deep, that the ideas are so flawed, the crisis so pervasive, so comprehensive that it can't be fixed. You have to create a new city. Holy shit. Right? That's staggering. And so now the compromise has been made. They're walking back to Cephalus's house. The young men think they've achieved a great victory. The great Socrates is coming back. We're going to have some wine. There's going to be a hell of a debate between Thrasymachus and Socrates. Then we're going to go back and we're going to watch the torch race, and we're going to rave and party all night. And they never go back. They're no longer citizens of Athens. They have now taken, and they don't even know it. This is what's so beautiful about it. They've taken the first step into becoming philosopher kings. These are this Socrates and these 8 or 9 young aristocrats. They become, in this kind of symbolic way, the original philosopher kings who will prepare this city in speech and then bring it into existence, if that's even possible, which of course it's not. That's why it's ironical. So the compromise has been made between power and wisdom. Power thinks it has achieved some victory, but they never return. And so they go to Cephalus's house. And they arrive at Cephalus's house, and Cephalus is there. Cephalus is Polemarchus's father. And they arrive, and Socrates and Cephalus are kind of the same age. They're older. And Socrates and Cephalus know each other very well. But because Cephalus is old, and by the way, I'm not sure if you know this, but if you've been to Athens, the Piraeus is the part of the town where the ships are. It's the docks, right? The Piraeus. And it's about 1.5 kilometers. It's almost a mile from downtown Athens. So it's not long if you're young, but it's long if you're old, right? During this time, there would have been a kind of a separation between the Piraeus was still Athens, to be sure, but the Piraeus would have been that part of Athens. It would have been the docks, right? It would have been that part of Athens that was a little more dangerous, a little more cosmopolitan, a little more foreign. It would have been where the things happened, right? And it was in some ways set apart from Athens. It's about 1 kilometer walk from the Piraeus proper to the city, right? And so Cephalus's house is in the Piraeus. It's near the Piraeus, and that's where they're going. So they go to Cephalus's house. They go to Polemarchus's house. Cephalus is Polemarchus's father, and they go to the house. And Socrates and Cephalus know each other. They've known each other for many years, but now because Cephalus is older, he can't make the journey into town easily. And so Cephalus and Socrates see each other, and they know each other. And Cephalus says, "Oh my goodness, Socrates, it's so wonderful to see you. I miss you. when I was younger, we used to go into town and see you all the time. But now that I'm older, I can't make the journey. It's too hard. And Cephalus says, so please come and see us, Socrates. We miss you, right? And Cephalus says in this funny way, he says, not only do I miss you, but now that I'm old, right, now I want to talk, right? Cephalus kind of makes a joke, and they talk about Sophocles and what sort of things old people do, right? And Cephalus says, well, now that I'm older, I don't care about sex, and I don't care about pleasure, and I don't care about money. I'm old. I'm free of those desires, Cephalus says, and now I want to talk. Now I understand the value of a good conversation. And Cephalus says, it's kind of funny. And so Cephalus says to Socrates, God, you gotta come down and see us some more. We miss you. And come and talk to us, And Socrates says, yeah, that's a good idea. I think I'll try that. And this is where the debate about justice begins. Now we can begin the debate about justice. And there are going to be three claims to what justice is. One by Cephalus, one by his son Polemachus, which is a version of his father's position, and then, of course, the one by Thrasymachus, the famous Thrasymachus that we will do on Thursday. And so in this conversation between Socrates and Cephalus, we have the opportunity to visit the first debate about justice. What is justice? Right? And again, too, remember that so the compromise has been made, right? Wisdom is now talking to power. Power is listening to wisdom, all in this kind of this sense of entertainment, this hope of entertainment. It's being facilitated through entertainment, right? Through a kind of pleasure, which is how irony is always disseminated. Irony is always disseminated through a kind of speaking to one's vanity. It gives, right, into an entertainment, here, don't think, but think. And so this conversation between Socrates and Cephalus begins. And now the debate about justice begins. Even though nobody knows they're having a debate about justice. And Socrates looks at Cephalus and they're talking about being old. And Socrates says, my goodness, Cephalus, you look great, right? You look great. And by the way, Cephalus has also been at the festival. He's all powdered and he's got his wreath on. He's probably had a few glasses of wine, right? He's looking very kind of jolly and happy, And Socrates says, God, Cephalus, you look fabulous. What do you attribute to your well-lived life? Right? What is, and this is a kind of synonym for justice. Socrates says, my goodness, Cephalus, you look well. You look like you're happy. You look like you're at peace, like you have some contentment. And Socrates says, why is that? What do you attribute this kind of appearance of justice that I see in you, this contentment that I see in you, Cephalus? And Cephalus says on page 6, he says on 6 and 7, he says, why are you at peace? Why do you have this sense of justice? Or what is this that I see? And Socrates says, why do you bear, he says to Cephalus, why do you bear your old age so well? Right? And again, this is a kind of a question about what do you think justice is? Cephalus. And Cephalus says, I bear my old age well. I have a kind of justice, Cephalus says. I feel just. I feel okay. I feel content. I don't fear my old age. I don't fear death. He says, I have a sense of justice, Cephalus says, because of my wealth, he says. Right? Cephalus says, because of my wealth, I've been able to pay everybody back. He says, I've in my old age, because of my wealth, I've been able to give back everything I owe. Right? And he says, on the top of page 7, on 331b, He says, the possession of money, Kepler, excuse me, the possession of money contributes a great deal to not cheating or lying to anyone against one's will, and moreover, to not departing for the other place, death, frightened because one owes sacrifices to a god or money to a human being, right? And so the first account of justice that kind of derives from the Homeric traditions in this general sense, right? Cephalus feels at peace, and he feels like he has a kind of justice, right? Because in his old age, because of his wealth, he's been able to repay all of his debts. He doesn't owe anybody anything. He hasn't, because of his wealth, he hasn't had to cheat anybody to get ahead. Because of his wealth, he's been able to pay off all of his debts, right? He's been able to return what he has borrowed. He's been able to give what he owes, right? And so the first definition of what justice is, deriving from the Homeric traditions, is justice is a kind of giving back what you owe. Justice is a kind of returning what you have borrowed, but giving back what you owe. Giving back what you owe. And Socrates says, in the middle of the page, a couple lines down, Socrates says, well, what you say is very fine, indeed, Cephalus, Socrates said. But as to this very thing, justice, shall we so simply assert that is the truth, that what you say is the truth, and giving back what a man has taken from another, right? And so Cephalus's argument of justice is that justice is giving back what you owe. And Socrates says, yeah, that's a very interesting idea. But is it the truth? Is it the whole truth of justice? And Socrates says, let's test it. Right? So again, this is Socrates. Well, what would happen, Cephalus, if you had borrowed, say, a weapon from a neighbor, and one day your neighbor came to you in a very agitated state, he'd been in a fight with another person, and he was very emotional, he was very agitated, he was not in a good state of mind. In fact, he was in a very unstable state of mind. And he comes to you, Cephalus, and he wants this weapon that you have borrowed, and he wants it now. And you know, and Socrates says, would it be just to return this weapon to this person who's obviously in this state of mind, who's about to do something terrible with it, right? Socrates says, you know, would it be just to return, to give back what you owe to a person who's obviously not in the right state of mind, right? That doesn't seem like a good idea, Socrates says. That doesn't seem like a good idea. In fact, that would be a very bad idea, I think, because you and I both know he's probably going to do something very, very dangerous with it, very harmful to another human being with it. And that would be unjust, Socrates says. And so in his kind of Platonic way, Socrates finds a counterexample to the statement, justice is giving back what you owe, right? Cephalus says, look, justice is giving back what you owe. And Socrates says, that's pretty interesting, right? But what happens when giving back what you owe is going to cause injustice, when it's going to cause harm, right? And we can't have injustice a part of justice, right? So Socrates finds a counterexample. He finds an example, right, that negates the claim that justice is giving back what you owe, right? And so Socrates says, I think that there's something really interesting about this idea, that there's something about justice that definitely has something to do with what we owe and what we give back. But that can't be all of justice, because it wouldn't be just to give a person who's not in a good state of mind a weapon, because he's going to do something unjust with it, right? And whatever justice is, we know that it has to be just, right? Whatever it is, it has to be in and of itself always just. It can't have injustice in it, right? That violates the kind of metaphysical argument, right? And so Socrates negates, he's able to kind of argue that justice simply can't be the giving back of what you owe, right? And he says, but as this very thing, justice, Socrates says, shall we so simply assert that it is the truth and giving back what a man has taken from another? or is to do these very things sometimes just and sometimes unjust. Take this case as an example, Socrates says to Cephalus, of what I mean. Everyone would surely say that if a man takes weapons from a friend when the latter is of sound mind, and the friend demands them back when he is mad, when he's angry or agitated or upset, obviously crazy, I guess we would say crazy, right? One shouldn't give back such things. And the man who gave them back would not be just. And moreover, one should not be willing to tell someone in this state of mind the whole truth. And Cephalus says, well, you're right. What you say is right, he said. Then this isn't the definition of justice, speaking the truth and giving back what one takes. All right, so the first example of justice, giving back what you owe, has been a counter example. It wouldn't be just to give back a friend weapons when he or she is in a not in a good state of mind. A counter example has been found. Okay, so now we're going to move to the second argument of justice. And we're going to do that on Thursday because we've only got a few minutes, and we'll take up Polemarchus's account of justice and then the famous debate between Socrates and Thrasymachus on Thursday. All right, you guys, man, good luck today. Sending you lots of love from Prague. Great lecture. Miss you guys very much. Midterm grades are coming. And like I said, good luck. And I hope to see you guys on Thursday. I hope the place doesn't burn down. So much love. Take care, you guys.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you,
Yep.
Professor.
Yep.